The funeral director handed me papers to sign while my mother's body was still warm. My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm 47, a nurse in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. For 3 months, I'd watched pancreatic cancer steal my mother piece by piece. I spent everything, even took a second mortgage on our family home trying to save her. Standard forms, he said gently. For the insurance claim. I was about to sign when I noticed something wrong. The beneficiary line didn't show my name. It showed Robert Thompson, my father, the man who abandoned us 15 years ago. There must be a mistake, I said. No mistake, ma'am. This was filed 2 weeks ago. But there wasn't a mistake. There was a plan. 3 hours later, Robert walked into my mother's funeral. The entire church fell silent. These were people who had watched me grow up without a father. Who had seen my mother work double shifts to pay for my nursing school. Now they stared at Robert like he was a ghost. Which, in a way, he was. But he wasn't alone. "Hello, Sarah," he said, like 15 years meant nothing. Beside him stood a woman half his age. Designer dress. Perfect makeup. The kind of woman who turns heads in small Pennsylvania towns. "This is Jessica," he announced to the shocked congregation. "My companion." I wanted to scream. To tell him he had no right to bring a stranger to my mother's burial. "But you don't make scenes at funerals." "I'm so sorry for our loss," Jessica whispered, extending a manicured hand. Our loss. Like she had known my mother. Like she belonged there. What I didn't know then was that Jessica had been recording every conversation. Every plan. Every lie Robert told about targeting elderly women. And 2 days later, she would show up at my door with bruises on her face and a small device that would destroy him. But that night, watching her stand beside my father, I only saw his perfect accomplice. I had no idea she was planning to become his perfect enemy. The man I had called father wasn't just a deadbeat dad. He was a predator who systematically targeted elderly women for their life savings. And the woman beside him? She wasn't just another victim. She was about to become the weapon that would bring him down. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The morning light filtered through the thin hospital curtains that Sarah had hung in her mother's bedroom 3 months ago. She sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, watching Helen's labored breathing. Each breath was a small victory against the pancreatic cancer that was stealing her mother's life piece by piece. Sarah Thompson had turned 47 last month, but she felt much older. The past 3 months of caregiving had added years to her face. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. Her nurse training helped her understand the medical details, but it couldn't prepare her for watching her own mother fade away. "Sarah, honey," Helen's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Mom." Helen's hand reached toward the bedside table where a stack of medical bills sat like accusations. Sarah had tried to hide them, but her mother always found them. "How much this time?" Sarah picked up the latest bill from the oncologist. The numbers seemed impossible. "Don't worry about it, Mom. Tell me." $3,000 for this week's treatment. Helen closed her eyes. The home hospice care was supposed to be covered by Medicare, but the additional pain medications and equipment costs kept mounting. Sarah had already taken a second mortgage on the house. The house that had been in their family for 30 years. "I never wanted this for you," Helen said. "Mom, stop. You didn't choose to get sick." But Helen wasn't listening to reassurances anymore. She was staring at the framed photo on her nightstand. The picture showed a younger Helen with her husband Robert and teenage Sarah at the Pennsylvania State Fair. 20 years ago, when they were still a family. "He should know," Helen said quietly. Sarah's stomach tightened. They had been through this conversation before. "Mom, he doesn't care. He's still your father. He stopped being my father 15 years ago when he moved in with that secretary." Helen turned her head toward Sarah. Even weak from chemotherapy, her mother's eyes still held determination. "Call him, Mom. Promise me, when I'm gone, call him." Sarah looked at her mother's face. The cheekbones were sharp now, the skin pale and thin. How could someone who had been so strong become so fragile in such a short time? "He doesn't even live in Pennsylvania anymore. For all we know, he's married to someone else now. I kept his business card. It's in my jewelry box." Of course she had. Helen Thompson had saved everything from their marriage. Even after Robert left them for a woman 20 years younger. Even after he stopped calling or visiting. Even after he missed Sarah's wedding and never met his only grandchildren. Sarah walked to the old wooden jewelry box on Helen's dresser. Inside, beneath her mother's pearl necklace and wedding ring, was a business card for R. Thompson, investment consultant, Phoenix, Arizona. Why, Mom? Why do you want him here? Because I'm dying, and some things shouldn't be left unfinished. The words hit Sarah like cold water. Helen rarely spoke so directly about her condition. The doctors had given her 2 weeks. That was 3 days ago. What if he doesn't come? Then at least we tried. Sarah returned to her chair and dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. Robert Thompson. Dad? It's Sarah. Silence. Then, Sarah? Is everything okay? His voice sounded the same. Still confident. Still smooth. The voice that had once read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bicycle. Mom is dying. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors say she has days, not weeks. Another pause. Sarah could hear traffic in the background. Normal life continuing while her world was falling apart. I'm sorry to hear that. Helen was always. She was a good woman. Was. Past tense already. She wants to see you. Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. We didn't part on good terms. I know, but she's asking for you. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could picture him calculating. Weighing obligations against convenience. Where is she? Home. We brought her home from the hospital last week. I'll try to drive up this weekend. Try. Not, I'll be there. Not, I'm leaving now. Try. Dad, it might not wait until the weekend. I understand. I'll do what I can. Sarah hung up and looked at her mother. Helen's eyes were closed, but she was smiling slightly. He'll try to come. Good. That evening, Sarah's husband David brought dinner from the Chinese restaurant downtown. Sweet and sour chicken that none of them had appetite for. He sat on the other side of Helen's bed, holding her other hand. How are you feeling, Helen? Tired, but grateful. Sarah's been an angel. David looked across the bed at his wife. Sarah's blonde hair had grown streaky with gray over the past months. She had lost weight from stress and irregular meals. But she had never complained. Never suggested they hire professional help they couldn't afford. She learned caring from the best, David said. Helen squeezed Sarah's hand. I need to tell you something. What is it, Mom? I changed my will last month. Everything goes to you. The house, the insurance money, everything. But there's a condition. Sarah leaned closer. What condition? You have to forgive your father. Mom, not for him, for you. Anger will eat you alive, honey. I've watched it happen to other people. Promise me you'll try. Sarah looked at her mother's face. The woman who had raised her alone after Robert left. Who had worked double shifts at the diner to pay for Sarah's nursing school. Who had never spoken a harsh word about the man who abandoned them. I promise I'll try. Helen smiled and closed her eyes. That's all anyone can do. At 2 in the morning, Sarah woke to the sound of changed breathing. Helen's respirations were shallower now, with longer pauses between each breath. Sarah had seen this pattern before in her patients. The end was close. She called David, who came downstairs in his pajamas. They sat together in the quiet room, listening to the clock tick and Helen's breath gradually slow. At 4:17 a.m., Helen opened her eyes one last time. Sarah? I'm here, Mom. Forgive him. Promise me. I promise. Helen squeezed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. Good girl. Those were her last words. Helen Thompson died holding her daughter's hand as the Pennsylvania dawn began to lighten the sky outside her bedroom window. Sarah sat in the sudden silence, still holding her mother's hand. 30 years of memories flooded through her mind. Birthday cakes and Christmas mornings. School plays and graduation ceremonies. All the moments when it should have been 2 parents but was only 1. David wrapped his arms around Sarah as she finally began to cry. Not the quiet tears she had shed over the past months, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from losing the person who had been her anchor for 47 years. The hospice nurse arrived an hour later to handle the official procedures. Paperwork that reduced Helen Thompson's life to medical terminology and official signatures. You should call the funeral home, the nurse said gently. Sarah nodded. She had already made the arrangements. Kramer Funeral Home on Main Street. A simple service at First Presbyterian Church. A burial plot next to Sarah's grandfather. Everything organized and paid for except the flowers. Helen had insisted on paying for her own funeral to spare Sarah the expense. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself making the phone calls that follow a death. The church. The newspaper for the obituary. Relatives who lived far away and would need time to travel. But she didn't call Robert. Not yet. That could wait until after the shock wore off. Until after she figured out how to honor her promise to forgive a man who had been absent for everything that mattered. Sarah sat in her mother's empty bedroom and tried to imagine what the next few days would bring. The funeral, the visitors, the process of saying goodbye to someone who had been her whole world. She looked at Robert's business card, still sitting on the nightstand. Phoenix, Arizona, 800 miles away from the life he had shared with them. Maybe he would come, maybe he wouldn't. Either way, Sarah would have to find a way to keep the promise she had made to her dying mother. The promise to forgive the unforgivable. 3 days later, Sarah stood at the entrance of Kramer Funeral Home, greeting the steady stream of people who had come to pay their respects to Helen Thompson. The viewing room smelled of lilies and old wood polish. Helen lay peacefully in the casket Sarah had chosen, wearing her favorite blue dress and the pearl necklace from her jewelry box. "She looks beautiful, Mrs. Peterson said, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Just like she's sleeping." Sarah nodded and managed a smile. The past 72 hours had passed in a blur of arrangements and phone calls. The obituary in the Lancaster Herald. The flowers from Helen's church friends. The casseroles and condolence cards that kept arriving at the house. David stood beside her in his dark suit, shaking hands and accepting hugs from people who had known Helen for decades. The owner of the diner where Helen had worked for 15 years. Neighbors from Maple Street. Women from her quilting circle at First Presbyterian. "Your mother was a saint," said Agnes Murphy, Helen's best friend. "Raising you alone after that man left. She never spoke a bad word about him, not once." Sarah's jaw tightened at the mention of Robert. She had called his number twice since Helen's death, but both times it went straight to voicemail. She had left messages with the funeral details, but he hadn't called back. Maybe it was better if he didn't come. Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to see him, especially not today. Pastor Williams approached with a gentle smile. "Sarah, the service tomorrow will be beautiful. Your mother would be proud. Thank you for everything, Pastor. Helen spoke of you often. How you cared for her these past months. That kind of devotion is rare." Sarah was about to respond when she heard a commotion near the entrance. Voices raised in surprise. The steady murmur of conversation had stopped. She turned toward the door and felt her breath catch. Robert Thompson stood in the doorway, looking exactly like she remembered but older. His dark hair was now silver, combed back in the same style he had worn 15 years ago. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. But it wasn't Robert who made the room go silent. It was the woman beside him. She was young, maybe 30 at most, Hispanic, with long black hair and striking features. She wore a black dress that was appropriate for a funeral but somehow managed to cling to her figure in all the right places. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor as they approached. Sarah stood frozen as conversations around the room gradually resumed in hushed whispers. Everyone was trying not to stare while simultaneously getting a good look at Robert Thompson and his companion. "Hello, Sarah." Robert's voice was exactly the same. Confident, smooth, the voice that had once promised her a pony for her 10th birthday and then forgotten completely. Dad. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She hadn't called him that in 15 years. Robert looked toward the casket where Helen lay surrounded by flowers. His expression was unreadable. "She looks peaceful." "Yes." The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably. Sarah realized she was waiting for an introduction that wasn't coming. "This is Jessica," Robert said finally. "Jessica Martinez. My companion." Companion. Not girlfriend. Not partner. Companion, like she was a travel accessory. Jessica extended a manicured hand. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Her voice carried a slight accent. Her grip was firm but nervous. "Thank you." Sarah didn't know what else to say. The woman looked younger up close. Definitely not 30, maybe 28 at most. Young enough to be Robert's daughter. David appeared at Sarah's elbow. "Robert. It's been a long time." The two men shook hands awkwardly. David had never liked Robert, not even before he abandoned the family. Something about his character that David had recognized before anyone else. David, you look well. Thank you for coming. I know it means a lot to Sarah. Did it? Sarah wasn't sure what it meant. She was still processing the shock of seeing her father after 15 years of absence. Accompanied by a woman who could have been in high school when Robert left his family. Agnes Murphy approached the group, her eyes sharp with curiosity and disapproval. Robert Thompson, my word, I never expected to see you here. Agnes, you haven't changed a bit. I wish I could say the same about you. The comment hung in the air like incense. Agnes had never been one to hide her feelings, and she had strong feelings about men who abandoned their wives and children. Robert cleared his throat. I was hoping we could talk, Sarah. About the arrangements. And other things. Other things? Helen's estate. The house. There are decisions that need to be made. Sarah felt David tense beside her. I think this might not be the right time, her husband said carefully. Actually, I think it's exactly the right time, Robert replied. These things are easier to handle sooner rather than later. Jessica touched Robert's arm gently. Maybe we should pay our respects first? She was trying to diffuse the tension, Sarah realized. Probably had experience managing Robert's social interactions. Of course. Robert walked toward the casket, leaving Jessica standing awkwardly with Sarah and David. Sarah watched her father approach Helen's body. He stood there for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back. From a distance, he almost looked like a grieving widower. But Sarah knew better. Robert Thompson was incapable of genuine grief. What he was calculating was how much Helen's death would affect his finances. How long have you been with my father? Sarah asked Jessica quietly. 2 years. 2 years. Helen had been fighting cancer for 18 months. Robert had been living with this woman while his ex-wife was dying, and he had never once called to check on her condition. Did he tell you about our family? Jessica's eyes darted toward Robert, then back to Sarah. Some. He said it was complicated. Complicated. That was one way to put it. Robert returned from the casket, his expression appropriately solemn. She looks beautiful, just like I remember her. Sarah wanted to scream. He remembered Helen young and healthy because that's when he had left them. He had no memory of the years of struggle that followed. The financial stress, the health problems, the loneliness. The funeral is tomorrow at 10, Sarah said stiffly. First Presbyterian Church. I'll be there. Will she? Sarah looked directly at Jessica. Robert's jaw tightened slightly. Jessica will be accompanying me, yes. The room had grown quieter around them. Sarah could feel people listening without seeming to listen. This conversation would be the talk of Lancaster for weeks. Dad, could I speak with you privately? Of course. They walked to a corner of the viewing room, away from the casket and the other mourners. Jessica remained with David, looking like she wished she could disappear. What are you doing here? Sarah asked quietly. Paying my respects to your mother. You didn't pay your respects when she was alive. Robert's expression hardened. Sarah, I know you're angry. I'm not angry. I'm confused. You vanished for 15 years. No calls. No visits. No cards on her birthday. And now you show up at her funeral with a woman half your age. Jessica is. I don't care what Jessica is. What I care about is why you're suddenly interested in Mom's estate. What decisions exactly need to be made? Robert glanced around the room, then back at Sarah. Helen and I were still legally married. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? We never finalized the divorce. There were papers filed, but the final decree was never signed. That's impossible. I have documentation. Sarah's mind raced. If Robert was telling the truth, if they were still legally married, then he would inherit everything. The house, the life insurance, everything Helen had intended to leave to Sarah. Mom would have told me. Helen didn't know. The lawyer was supposed to notify both parties when the papers were complete, but there was some administrative error. I only found out recently when I was updating my own estate planning. Recently? How recently? And why was Robert updating his estate planning? I don't believe you. Robert shrugged. Believe what you want. The law is the law. Sarah looked across the room at Jessica, who was standing uncomfortably beside David. The young woman kept glancing toward the door like she wanted to run. Why did you bring her? Jessica is my partner. She goes where I go. To your ex-wife's funeral? To my wife's funeral. The correction was deliberate. A reminder that Robert still had legal claims on Helen's life, even in death. Sarah felt sick. Her mother's body wasn't even in the ground yet, and Robert was already making property claims. We'll see about that, she said quietly. Sarah, I'm not trying to take anything that doesn't belong to me. But facts are facts. The fact is that you abandoned Mom 15 years ago. You don't get to show up now and claim husband's rights. Legally, I do. Robert walked back toward Jessica, leaving Sarah standing alone in the corner. The viewing room continued its quiet hum of conversation, but everything felt different now. Poisoned. David appeared at her side. What was that about? He claims they were still married. That the divorce was never finalized. That's not possible. I need to call Mom's lawyer. First thing tomorrow after the funeral. David wrapped his arm around Sarah's shoulders. We'll figure this out, but Sarah wasn't sure they would. Robert had always been good at finding loopholes, at bending rules to his advantage. It was how he had built his business. And apparently, it was how he planned to steal her mother's legacy. She watched him guide Jessica toward the exit, his hand possessive on her lower back. They made a striking couple. Distinguished older man and beautiful younger woman. It would look perfectly normal to anyone who didn't know the history. Agnes Murphy appeared at Sarah's elbow. That girl is scared of him. What? I've seen that look before. She's afraid. Watch how she stands. Never quite relaxed. Always ready to move away from him. Sarah looked toward the door where Robert and Jessica were saying goodbye to Pastor Williams. Agnes was right. Jessica's posture was tense. Defensive. Poor thing, Agnes continued. Probably has no idea what she's gotten herself into. What do you mean? Men like your father don't change, honey. They just find new victims. The viewing ended an hour later. Sarah stood in the empty room with Helen's casket, trying to process what had just happened. Tomorrow she would bury her mother. And then she would have to fight her father for the right to honor Helen's wishes. It wasn't the goodbye she had planned. But then again, Robert had always had a talent for ruining important moments. Sarah touched her mother's hand one last time. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to forgive him for this. Outside, the Pennsylvania evening was cool and clear. A peaceful end to a day that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring the funeral. And after that, Sarah would discover just how far Robert was willing to go to claim what he believed was his. The only question was whether Jessica would help him or find the courage to tell the truth about the man she was afraid to cross. The sanctuary of First Presbyterian Church had never held so many people. Sarah sat in the front pew, flanked by David and her teenage children, watching as friends and neighbors filled every available seat. Helen Thompson had been loved by this community, and it showed. Pastor Williams stood at the pulpit, his voice gentle but clear as he spoke about Helen's life of service and sacrifice. The woman who had raised her daughter alone, who had worked double shifts to pay for nursing school, who had never complained about the hand life had dealt her. Sarah tried to focus on the words, but her attention kept drifting to the third row on the left side of the church. Robert sat with perfect posture, his silver hair catching the light from the stained glass windows. Beside him, Jessica sat stiffly in a conservative black dress, her eyes fixed on her hands. They looked like respectable mourners. But Sarah knew better. Helen Thompson was a woman of quiet strength, Pastor Williams was saying. She faced life's challenges with grace and dignity. Her legacy lives on in her daughter Sarah, who inherited Helen's caring nature and dedication to helping others. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Sarah felt the weight of their support and love. These people had watched her grow up, had celebrated her graduation from nursing school, had brought casseroles when Helen got sick. At this time, we'll invite family members to share their memories of Helen. Sarah had prepared a short eulogy. Stories about her mother's kindness, her strength, her unwavering faith. She stood and walked to the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded her notes. My mother was the strongest person I knew, she began. Before she could continue, Robert stood up. Pastor Williams, if I may? A hush fell over the congregation. Sarah froze at the podium. Of course, Robert. Please. Robert walked to the front of the church with the confidence of a man who had given many presentations. He didn't need notes. Didn't hesitate. Thank you. I know some of you may be surprised to see me here today. Helen and I had our differences over the years. But she was still my wife. Sarah's mouth fell open. Still his wife. He was announcing his legal claim publicly, in front of the entire church. I want people to know that Helen was a remarkable woman. Beautiful, intelligent, devoted. Our marriage had its challenges, like all marriages do. Sometimes men make mistakes. Sometimes they need time to find their way back to what matters most. He was rewriting history, making their 15-year separation sound like a temporary rough patch. Helen and I spoke recently about reconciling. About putting our family back together. She had forgiven me for my past mistakes, and we were planning a future together. Sarah gripped the podium to keep from falling. He was lying. Completely, outrageously lying. Unfortunately, her illness prevented us from formalizing our reconciliation. But in her heart, Helen had already welcomed me home. The congregation was completely silent. Sarah could feel their confusion. Their surprise. Some of them looked between Robert and Sarah, trying to understand what was happening. Pastor Williams cleared his throat. Robert, thank you for those personal reflections. Sarah, would you like to continue? But Sarah couldn't speak. The words she had prepared about her mother's independent strength seemed impossible to say while Robert stood there claiming Helen had wanted him back. Actually, Robert continued, I think it's important that people understand Helen's last wishes. She asked me to take care of Sarah. To help with the decisions that need to be made now. Dad, that's not. Sarah's been under tremendous stress these past months. The medical bills, the mortgage problems. It's been overwhelming for her. He was doing it again. Making her sound incompetent in front of everyone who knew her. Helen was worried about Sarah's ability to handle the estate matters. The insurance paperwork. The house sale. House sale? Sarah had never mentioned selling the house. Agnes Murphy stood up from her seat in the fourth row. Now you wait just a minute, Robert Thompson. Mrs. Murphy, please, Pastor Williams said gently. This isn't the appropriate time. It's the perfect time, Agnes replied sharply. This man abandoned Helen 15 years ago. Left her with a sick daughter to raise and bills to pay. He has no right to stand in this church and rewrite history. Agnes, Robert said with patient condescension, I understand you're upset. Helen valued your friendship, but you weren't privy to our private conversations. You don't know what arrangements Helen and I had made. I know Helen Thompson better than you ever did. And she never mentioned any reconciliation to me. Helen was a private person. She wouldn't have discussed such personal matters until everything was settled. Other people were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was supposed to be a funeral service, not a family argument. Jessica remained seated, but Sarah noticed her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. The young woman looked miserable. Sarah, Pastor Williams said gently, would you like to share your prepared remarks? But Robert wasn't finished. I also want people to know that I'll be taking responsibility for all of Helen's outstanding medical bills. Sarah shouldn't have to bear that burden alone. Taking responsibility. With what money? Helen's insurance money, most likely. The house will need significant repairs before it can be sold. I'll be overseeing that process as well. The house isn't for sale, Sarah said finally, finding her voice. Sarah, honey, be realistic. The mortgage is 3 months behind. The repair costs would be enormous. It's better to sell now and use the proceeds to pay off Helen's debts. 3 months behind? How did he know about the mortgage payments? These are private family matters, David said, standing up. Perhaps we should discuss them after the service. You're absolutely right, Robert agreed. I apologize to everyone for bringing up business during this solemn occasion. It's just that Helen was so worried about Sarah's financial situation. She asked me to step in and help. He was positioning himself as the responsible family member. The one who would clean up the mess that Sarah had made of her mother's affairs. Helen Thompson never asked you for anything, Agnes said loudly. She raised that girl by herself while you were off playing house with women half your age. The congregation erupted in whispers. Agnes had said what everyone was thinking but no one else had dared to voice. Robert's face flushed slightly, but his voice remained calm. Mrs. Murphy, I understand you're grieving. We all are. But personal attacks aren't going to help anyone through this difficult time. What would help is if you showed some respect for Helen's memory and let her daughter bury her in peace. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Sarah needs support right now, not additional stress. The only stress here is coming from you. Pastor Williams stepped forward. I think we should return to celebrating Helen's life. There will be time for family discussions later. But the damage was done. The congregation was buzzing with conversation. Helen's funeral had become a spectacle. Sarah returned to her seat, her prepared eulogy undelivered. David squeezed her hand, but she could feel the eyes of everyone in the church on her family. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Hymns that Helen had loved. Prayers for the departed. The slow procession to the cemetery where Helen would be buried next to Sarah's grandfather. At the graveside, Robert positioned himself prominently among the family members. When Pastor Williams asked if anyone wanted to say final words, Robert stepped forward again. Helen, I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I'm here now. I'll take care of Sarah and make sure your wishes are honored. Sarah wanted to scream, wanted to tell everyone that Robert was lying about her mother's wishes. That Helen had wanted nothing to do with the man who had abandoned them. But you don't make scenes at gravesides. You don't shout accusations over your mother's casket. So Sarah stood in silence and watched Robert claim ownership of Helen's legacy. In front of witnesses who would remember his words. In front of Pastor Williams, who might be called upon to testify about Helen's last wishes. After the burial, people gathered at the church fellowship hall for the traditional meal. Sarah moved through the crowd like a sleepwalker, accepting condolences and listening to stories about her mother. But she could hear the whispered conversations around the edges of the room. I had no idea Robert and Helen were reconciling. Sarah must be devastated, first losing her mother, and now finding out about all these financial problems. At least Robert is stepping up to help. Better late than never. Robert worked the room like a political candidate. Shaking hands, accepting sympathy, explaining to anyone who would listen how he planned to help Sarah through this difficult transition. Jessica sat alone at a corner table, picking at a piece of cake she clearly didn't want. Several church ladies had approached her with polite conversation, but she responded with nervous smiles and brief answers. Sarah finally couldn't stand it anymore. She walked over to Jessica's table. Are you enjoying the service? Jessica looked up with startled eyes. It was beautiful. Your mother sounded like a wonderful woman. She was. For all 47 years of my life. The emphasis wasn't lost on Jessica. She understood the implication. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you? Of course I am. Then maybe you could help me understand something. How long has my father been planning this? Planning what? This performance. The reconciliation story. The financial rescue act. Jessica glanced around the room nervously. I don't know what you mean. My father doesn't do anything without a plan. And this whole production feels very well rehearsed. Sarah, I think there might be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is my father thinking he can waltz back into my life and steal my mother's legacy. Jessica's face went pale. I should find Robert. She stood quickly, but Sarah caught her arm. Wait, you don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not afraid. But she was. Sarah could see it in her eyes. The same fear Agnes had noticed at the funeral home. Who are you afraid of then? Jessica pulled her arm free and hurried across the room to where Robert was holding court with some of Helen's former co-workers. Sarah watched her whisper something in Robert's ear. Watched his expression change as he looked back at Sarah. This was just the beginning. Robert had made his opening move, and it had been brilliant. He had established himself as Helen's grieving husband and Sarah's concerned father in front of an entire church full of witnesses. Now Sarah would have to prove that everything he had said was a lie. The problem was, she had no idea how to do that. Robert had always been smarter than she was. Better at manipulating people and situations to his advantage. But this time, he had made one mistake. He had brought Jessica. And from the way Jessica kept glancing toward the exit, Sarah suspected the young woman might not be as loyal to Robert as he believed. The question was whether Sarah could get to her before Robert realized the danger. The afternoon sun slanted through the fellowship hall windows as people began to leave. Sarah stood in the gathering shadows and planned her next move. Her mother was buried. Her father had publicly claimed his place in the family. Now the real fight would begin. Sarah sat in her mother's empty bedroom at midnight, surrounded by boxes of medical bills and legal documents. The funeral reception had ended 6 hours ago, but she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Robert's voice announcing his plans to help with Helen's estate. The house felt different now. Hollow. Even though Helen's bed was still made with her favorite quilt, even though her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, everything had changed. David knocked softly on the doorframe. "You should get some rest." "I can't. Not until I figure out what he's doing." She held up a stack of papers from Helen's desk drawer. "Look at this, David. Mom's will is dated 3 months ago. Everything goes to me. The house, her savings account, the life insurance. But if Robert is telling the truth about them still being married, he's lying. What if he's not? What if there really was some administrative error with the divorce papers?" David sat on the edge of Helen's bed. "Then we'll fight it. We'll get a lawyer." "With what money? We already took out a second mortgage to pay for Mom's medical care." Sarah pulled out another document. A notice from Mutual Life Insurance Company that had arrived in yesterday's mail. "This is what really scares me. Look at the date." David read the letter. "Beneficiary change request. Submitted 2 weeks ago?" 2 weeks ago, Mom was barely conscious. She couldn't have signed anything. So Robert forged it? That's what I thought. But look at the signature. David studied the document. The signature looked exactly like Helen's careful handwriting. "It's too perfect," Sarah said. Mom's hands were shaking from the medication. She could barely hold a pen toward the end. "But this signature is perfect. Maybe he had her sign it earlier, before she got sicker. Then why submit it 2 weeks ago instead of months ago?" Sarah spread out more papers on the bed. Bank statements, insurance documents, property deeds. "I think he's been planning this for a long time, David. Look at these bank statements. Someone has been monitoring Mom's account activity for months. How is that possible? Online access. If Robert still had Mom's social security number and some personal information, he could have set up online banking access." David was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, what if this goes deeper than just the insurance money?" "What do you mean? What if Robert knew Helen was sick before he contacted him?" The thought sent a chill through Sarah's chest. How could he have known? Medicare records, hospital admissions. If he had access to her personal information. Sarah's phone rang, startling them both. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Sarah Thompson?" The voice was female, older. "Yes. This is Margaret Willis from Mutual Life Insurance. I'm calling about your mother's policy." Sarah's heart began racing. "What about it?" "We received a death certificate and a claim request today. From Robert Thompson. He's listed as the beneficiary on Helen Thompson's policy." "When was that change made?" "According to our records, the original beneficiary change was submitted 3 months ago. But there's been some irregularity in the paperwork." "What kind of irregularity?" "The signatures don't match our records perfectly. We're going to need additional documentation before we can process the claim." Sarah felt a moment of hope. "What kind of documentation?" "Proof of marriage. The beneficiary claims to be Helen's husband, but our original policy shows Helen as divorced." "She was divorced 15 years ago. That's what our records indicate. Mr. Thompson will need to provide a marriage certificate or other legal documentation proving his current marital status to the deceased." Sarah caught David's eye. If Robert couldn't prove he was married to Helen, he couldn't claim the insurance money. How long does he have to provide that documentation? 30 days from the date of claim. After that, the benefit reverts to the secondary beneficiary. Who is the secondary beneficiary? Sarah Thompson. You. After hanging up, Sarah felt her first moment of relief since the funeral. Robert might have managed to change the beneficiary designation, but he still had to prove his legal right to the money. "Maybe we have a chance," she said to David. "What did they say?" Sarah explained the insurance company's requirements. David nodded slowly. "So he needs to prove he was married to Helen when she died." "Right. And if the divorce really was finalized 15 years ago, he can't do that. Unless what? Unless he has documentation we don't know about. False marriage certificates. Forged documents." Sarah's brief hope began to fade. Robert had always been resourceful when it came to paperwork and legal technicalities. "I need to find Mom's divorce papers. The originals." They searched through Helen's filing cabinet, her desk drawers, even the old shoebox where she kept important documents. But there was no copy of the final divorce decree. She must have kept it somewhere else, David said. Or Robert took it. Maybe when he was here making Mom sign the insurance changes. He was here? How else would he have gotten her signature? And how else would he know about our mortgage problems? Sarah thought back to the past few months. Helen's condition had made her confused sometimes, especially toward the end. If Robert had visited while Sarah was at work, Helen might not have understood what she was signing. I should have been here more, Sarah said quietly. I should have taken leave from the hospital. You did everything you could. Helen wanted you to keep working. But I left her alone. And he took advantage of that. Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Lancaster County Hospital. Sarah, this is Jennifer in billing. I'm sorry to call so late, but we received an interesting call today about Helen Thompson's account. What kind of call? A man claiming to be her husband called to discuss payment arrangements. He wanted to set up a payment plan for the outstanding charges. How much does Mom owe? $12,400. But here's the strange part. The man offered to pay the entire amount immediately if we could provide him with copies of all Helen's medical records. Sarah's blood ran cold. What did you tell him? That we can't release medical records without written authorization from the patient or legal next of kin. He said he was working on getting the proper documentation. If he calls again, don't give him anything. I'm Helen's next of kin, and I haven't authorized any record releases. Understood. Sarah, is everything okay? I'm not sure yet. After hanging up, Sarah looked at David with growing alarm. He wants Mom's medical records. Why would he need those unless? Unless what? Unless he's building some kind of case. Trying to prove Mom was incompetent when she signed the insurance papers. But that would work in our favor, wouldn't it? If she was incompetent, then the signature wouldn't be valid. Not if he claims he was her legal guardian. Her husband. If he can prove they were married, then he would have had the right to make financial decisions for her. Sarah felt trapped in a maze of legal technicalities, all designed to benefit Robert at her expense. The phone rang a third time. Sarah almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID showed her neighbor's number. Sarah, it's Betty from next door. I hope I'm not calling too late. No, it's fine. What's wrong? I wanted to tell you about something strange that happened this afternoon. After the funeral, what happened? A young Hispanic woman came to your door. Pretty thing, but she looked upset. She knocked for about 5 minutes, but when no one answered, she left something on your porch. What did she leave? I don't know. An envelope, maybe? She looked around real nervous like before she left it. Sarah thanked Betty and hurried downstairs to check the front porch. There, wedged under the doormat, was a white envelope with, Sarah, written on the front in careful handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a brief message. We need to talk, but not where he can see us. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., parking lot behind Walmart. Come alone. Jessica. Sarah showed the note to David. What do you think? I think she knows something Robert doesn't want you to know. Or it's a trap. Maybe. But what if it's not? What if she's trying to help you? Sarah thought about Jessica's behavior at the funeral. The nervous glances. The way she seemed uncomfortable with Robert's performance. Agnes said she looked scared of him. Then maybe she's looking for a way out. Sarah folded the note and put it in her pocket. Tomorrow she would find out whether Jessica Martinez was Robert's accomplice or his next victim. Either way, it was the first real lead Sarah had in a fight that seemed increasingly one-sided. The house settled around them with small creaks and sighs. Helen's bedroom clock ticked steadily toward morning. In a few hours, Sarah would have to face whatever truth Jessica was offering. But first, she had to survive the rest of the night. With the growing certainty that her father had orchestrated Helen's final months more carefully than anyone had realized. And that everything she thought she knew about her mother's death might be wrong. The next morning, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had grown cold an hour ago. She kept reading Jessica's note, trying to decide if the meeting was worth the risk. David had left for work, but not before making Sarah promise to call him if anything felt dangerous. The house felt empty without Helen's presence, and the silence made every small sound seem amplified. Sarah walked upstairs to her mother's bedroom and began going through Helen's personal belongings more systematically. There had to be something. Some clue about what Robert had really been doing during those final months. In Helen's jewelry box, underneath her pearl necklace and wedding ring, Sarah found something she had missed before. A small brass key that didn't match any lock in the house. She examined it carefully. It was old, probably from the 1990s, and had tiny numbers etched on one side: 247. A safety deposit box key. Sarah called First National Bank, where Helen had done her banking for 30 years. "This is Sarah Thompson, Helen Thompson's daughter. I need to ask about a safety deposit box. I'm sorry for your loss, honey. Your mother was such a sweet lady. Let me check our records." Yes, Helen had box 247. "Do you have the key? I just found it. Can I access the box?" "You'll need to bring Helen's death certificate and proof that you're her legal heir. The box is registered solely in her name." Sarah gathered the necessary documents and drove to the bank. The safety deposit box was in the basement vault, accessed through a series of locked doors and verification procedures. Inside the small metal box were documents Sarah had never seen before. Old insurance policies, stock certificates from companies that no longer existed, and at the bottom, a manila envelope marked "Robert, divorce papers," in Helen's careful handwriting. Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands. The divorce decree was dated February 15, 2009. 15 years ago, just as Sarah remembered. But there were other papers underneath it. Letters, documents, evidence of a story Sarah had never heard. The first letter was from Robert's lawyer, dated 6 months after the divorce was finalized. "Mrs. Thompson, my client wishes to inform you that he is contesting the division of marital assets. The stock portfolio transfer was completed in error. Please contact this office to arrange return of securities valued at $127,000. Helen's response, in her own handwriting. "Mr. Patterson, the divorce decree clearly states that all securities remain with me as compensation for Mr. Thompson's abandonment of his family obligations. I will not be returning any assets. Helen Thompson." There were more letters, increasingly hostile demands from Robert's lawyer, threats of legal action, claims that Helen had manipulated the divorce settlement. And then Sarah found something that made her stomach drop. A handwritten letter from Robert to Helen, dated just 3 years ago. "Helen, I know you're sick. I've been keeping track of your medical situation through public records. I want to help. I know you're struggling with expenses, and I feel responsible for leaving you in a difficult financial position. I've enclosed papers that would allow me to assist with your medical costs. All you need to do is sign the insurance beneficiary forms and the power of attorney documents. This would give me the legal authority to handle your healthcare decisions if you become unable to do so yourself. I know you don't trust me, but I'm trying to make amends for the past. Sarah doesn't need to know about this arrangement. We can handle it privately, between us. Please consider this. I owe you at least this much. Robert." The letter was paper-clipped to unsigned legal documents. Power of attorney forms that would have given Robert complete control over Helen's finances and medical care. But Helen had never signed them. Instead, she had written a response on the back of Robert's letter. "Robert, you owe me nothing. Sarah and I have managed fine without you for 15 years. We don't need your help now. Please don't contact me again." Except Robert had continued contacting her. The safety deposit box contained 3 more letters, each one more insistent than the last. In the final letter, dated just 2 months ago, Robert's tone had changed completely. "Helen, you're being unreasonable. I have legal rights as your husband, and I intend to exercise them. The divorce decree you're relying on contains errors that I can challenge in court. I've spoken with lawyers who confirm that our marriage was never properly dissolved due to procedural mistakes during the original filing. This means I'm still your legal spouse and have rights to make decisions about your medical care and estate. I'm going to help you whether you want me to or not. It's what a husband does for his wife." Sarah read the letter twice, her hands shaking. Robert had been planning this for months, maybe years. He had researched Helen's medical condition, studied the divorce papers for loopholes, built a legal strategy to claim rights he didn't have. But most chilling of all was the final paragraph. "I know you're going to die soon, Helen. The cancer statistics for someone your age are very clear. When that happens, I'll be there for Sarah. She'll need a father to help her through the financial difficulties you're leaving behind." He had known Helen was dying. Had been waiting for it. Planning for it. Sarah felt sick. She gathered all the documents and drove home, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. Robert hadn't suddenly decided to reconcile with Helen. He had been stalking her medical condition for years, waiting for the right moment to claim her assets. And somehow, despite Helen's refusal to sign his papers, he had managed to change the insurance beneficiary anyway. Which meant he had forged her signature. Or found another way to manipulate the system. Sarah looked at her watch. 1:30 p.m. She had 30 minutes to decide whether to meet Jessica at Walmart. The documents in the safety deposit box proved that Robert was a predator. But they didn't prove that his insurance claim was fraudulent. For that, Sarah needed more evidence. And Jessica might be the only person who could provide it. Sarah grabbed her keys and headed for the door. Whatever Jessica had to say, it couldn't be worse than what Sarah had already discovered about her father's true nature. But as she drove toward Walmart, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more dangerous than a simple conversation. Robert Thompson had been planning this for years. He wasn't going to let one scared young woman destroy his carefully constructed scheme. The question was whether Jessica understood that her life might depend on her next decision. The Walmart parking lot was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. Sarah parked near the back, away from the store entrance, and checked her phone. No messages. No missed calls. She was 5 minutes early. At exactly 2 p.m., a silver Honda Civic pulled into the parking space beside her. Jessica Martinez stepped out, wearing jeans and a simple white blouse instead of the expensive clothes Sarah had seen at the funeral. She looked younger without the funeral dress and makeup. And more frightened. Jessica glanced around the parking lot nervously before getting into Sarah's passenger seat. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "What do you want to tell me?" Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "First, I need you to understand something. Robert doesn't know I'm here. If he finds out..." She touched her jaw gingerly. Even with makeup, Sarah could see the edge of a bruise. "He hit you? Last night, when I asked too many questions about your mother's insurance money." Jessica turned on the recorder and set it on the dashboard between them. "I need you to hear this conversation. From 2 nights ago, after the viewing." She pressed play. Robert's voice filled the car, clear and unmistakable. "The Thompson situation is working out perfectly. Helen's dead, the insurance paperwork is in place, and Sarah doesn't suspect anything." A second voice, also male. "What about the daughter? She seemed suspicious at the funeral. Sarah's emotional. Grieving. She won't think clearly for weeks. By the time she figures out what's happening, the money will be transferred and untouchable." "And the girl? Jessica?" "Jessica's useful for now. Makes me look stable, domestic. But she asks too many questions. Maybe it's time to move on to the next one." "Not yet. I need Jessica to help sell the Grieving Husband Act. After the insurance money clears, then we can discuss other arrangements." The recording ended. Jessica turned off the device with shaking hands. "How many recordings do you have?" Sarah asked. "Dozens. I've been recording his phone calls for months. Ever since I realized what he was really doing." "Which is what, exactly?" Jessica took a deep breath. "Your father targets widows and elderly women. He researches their financial situations through public records. Property values, insurance policies, bank accounts. How? He has contacts. People who work at banks, insurance companies, county clerks' offices. They feed him information about women who have assets but no close family nearby." Sarah felt sick. "How many women? That I know about? 7 in the past 3 years. But I think there were others before I met him." Jessica pulled out a manila folder from her purse. "These are copies of documents from Robert's home office. Financial records for all his projects." Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at detailed profiles of elderly women across Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Each file contained personal information, financial data, and something labeled Timeline to Acquisition. Helen's file was at the top of the stack. "Helen Thompson, 72, Lancaster, Pennsylvania," Sarah read aloud. "Divorced, 1 daughter. Estimated assets: house $180,000, insurance $150,000, savings $45,000. Health status: terminal cancer, 6 to 18 months. Target completion: spring 2024. Target completion. Her mother's death had been a target completion. How does he do it? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Different methods for different women. Sometimes he befriends them. Sometimes he poses as a financial advisor or insurance agent. Sometimes he claims to be a long-lost relative. But with my mother, he was actually her ex-husband. That made it easier. He already had access to her personal information. Social security number, date of birth, medical history. He could monitor her credit reports, her bank accounts, her insurance policies. Sarah thought about the phone calls to the hospital. Robert asking about Helen's medical records. He's been watching her for years? Since her diabetes diagnosis in 2018. He tracks women with chronic conditions that are likely to worsen. Then he waits for the right moment to make contact. Jessica pulled out another document. This is Robert's standard timeline. First contact when the woman is diagnosed with a serious illness. Months of careful relationship building. Then gradual assumption of financial responsibilities. But Mom refused his help. That's why he had to get creative. Forging signatures. Filing false insurance claims. He was hoping your mother would become incompetent enough that no one would question his legal authority. Except she died too quickly. Right, so he had to improvise. Claim they were still married. Present himself as the grieving husband. Sarah studied the documents in Helen's file. Bank statements showing regular monitoring of her accounts. Credit reports that Robert had illegally accessed. Even medical information that should have been private. How did he get all this personal information? His partner, a man named Carl Morrison. He works for a data broker company that sells personal information to marketing companies. But Carl also sells more detailed financial profiles to people like Robert. People like Robert? There's a whole network. Men who target elderly women for inheritance fraud. They share information about potential victims. Techniques for gaining trust. Ways to manipulate legal documents. Jessica showed Sarah another folder labeled Network Contacts. This is terrifying, Sarah said. It gets worse. Some of these men don't wait for natural deaths. What do you mean? I mean they help things along. Medication errors. Falls downstairs. Medical neglect. Sarah's blood went cold. Are you saying Robert killed my mother? I don't think so. Helen's cancer was real, and it was terminal. But if she had lived longer than his timeline predicted. Jessica didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood the implication. Why are you telling me this? Why risk helping me? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Because I recognized your mother's name when Robert first mentioned the Thompson case. What do you mean? My grandmother was Isabella Martinez. She died 3 years ago in Phoenix. The police said it was a heart attack, but the family always suspected something was wrong. Oh my God. Robert was dating my grandmother when she died. He inherited her house and her savings. That's how I met him initially. I was investigating my grandmother's death. And instead you ended up dating him? He's very charming, very convincing, and I was young and stupid. By the time I realized what he was, I was already trapped. Jessica touched her bruised jaw again. He doesn't let people leave easily. Sarah looked at the woman beside her. Barely 30 years old, caught in a nightmare that had started with her own grandmother's death. What's your plan now? I have enough evidence to destroy him. Bank records, insurance fraud documentation, recordings of him planning crimes. But I need your help. What kind of help? Robert is expecting the insurance money to transfer next week. If it doesn't, he'll know something is wrong. He'll realize I've betrayed him. And then? Then I'll probably end up like some of the other women who got too close to his business. Sarah understood. Jessica wasn't just offering to help expose Robert's crimes. She was asking Sarah to help save her life. What do you need me to do? Go to the FBI. Today. Tell them everything. Give them these documents and recordings. Will you come with me? I can't. Robert is expecting me home by 4 o'clock. If I'm late, he'll start asking questions. Jessica gathered the documents and recordings. But I'll testify. When the time comes, I'll tell them everything. Jessica, this is incredibly dangerous for you. I know, but I can't let him do to other families what he did to mine. And what he's trying to do to yours. Sarah took Jessica's hand. After this is over, you'll be free of him. If we both survive long enough to see this through. Jessica got out of the car and walked back to her Honda. Before driving away, she rolled down her window. Sarah, your mother was lucky to have a daughter who loved her so much. Don't let Robert take that away from her. As Jessica drove out of the parking lot, Sarah sat in her car holding evidence of her father's systematic predation of elderly women. Her mother hadn't been a random victim. She had been a carefully selected target in a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. But now Robert's operation was about to be exposed by the one person he had trusted to help him carry it out. Sarah started her car and headed toward the FBI field office in Harrisburg. She had a story to tell that would put Robert Thompson away forever. The only question was whether Jessica would live long enough to help her tell it. The FBI field office in Harrisburg was a stark, concrete building that looked more like a government warehouse than the center of federal law enforcement for central Pennsylvania. Sarah sat in Agent Rebecca Martinez's office, surrounded by evidence boxes and recording equipment. "Mrs. Thompson," Agent Martinez said, "what you're describing is a federal RICO case. Organized criminal enterprise spanning multiple states. How many women are we talking about? Based on the documents you've provided, at least 12 confirmed victims over the past 5 years. But we suspect there are more." Agent Martinez was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes who had spent 15 years investigating white-collar crime. She spread Jessica's documents across her desk like pieces of a puzzle. "Your father's operation is more sophisticated than most inheritance fraud schemes. The data broker connection gives him access to potential victims across the entire Northeast. What about Jessica? Is she safe? We have her under surveillance. If Robert becomes suspicious, we'll move to protect her." Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Raymond Beck with Lancaster County Sheriff's Department. We need you to come to the station immediately." "What's wrong?" "There's been an incident involving Jessica Martinez." Sarah's blood went cold. "What kind of incident?" "She was found unconscious in her apartment 2 hours ago. Apparent drug overdose. She's alive, but she's in critical condition at Lancaster General Hospital." Agent Martinez was already grabbing her coat. "We're on our way." The drive to Lancaster took 45 minutes that felt like hours. Sarah kept thinking about Jessica's bruised face, her nervous glances, her fear of what Robert would do if he discovered her betrayal. At the hospital, Detective Beck met them in the ICU waiting room. He was a heavy-set man with tired eyes who looked like he had seen too many suspicious overdoses. "What kind of drugs?" Agent Martinez asked. "Combination of prescription painkillers and sedatives. Enough to kill someone, but she was found in time." "Who found her?" Anonymous tip called in to 911. Female voice, wouldn't give a name. Sarah and Agent Martinez exchanged looks. "Someone had wanted Jessica to be found alive. Can we see her? She's unconscious, but stable. The doctor says she'll probably wake up in a few hours." They were led to Jessica's room, where she lay connected to various monitors and IV lines. She looked even younger than her 28 years, pale and fragile against the white hospital sheets. "Detective Beck," Agent Martinez said, "this wasn't a suicide attempt. This woman is a federal witness in a major fraud investigation. You think someone tried to kill her?" "I think someone wanted to send a message. Make her look unreliable, drug addicted, unstable." Sarah sat beside Jessica's bed and took her hand. "Jessica? Can you hear me?" Jessica's eyes fluttered open. She looked confused, disoriented. "Sarah? What happened?" "You were drugged. You're in the hospital." "Robert? Where's Robert?" "He's not here. You're safe." Jessica tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. "He knows. He figured out what I was doing." "How?" "I was supposed to be home by 4 o'clock. When I got there, he was waiting with questions. About where I'd been, who I'd talked to." "What did you tell him?" "I said I was shopping. But he checked my car's GPS. He knew I'd been at Walmart." Jessica closed her eyes. "He made me a drink. Said we needed to talk about our future together. I remember feeling dizzy, and then nothing." Agent Martinez stepped forward. "Jessica, this is very important. Did Robert force you to take drugs?" "I don't remember taking anything. Just the drink he gave me." "We're going to need to test that glass. Do you remember where you left it?" "Kitchen counter, I think." Agent Martinez called the FBI crime scene team to process Jessica's apartment. But Sarah knew they probably wouldn't find anything useful. Robert was too smart to leave evidence. "Jessica," Sarah said gently, "Robert is trying to discredit you. Make you look like an unreliable witness." "Did it work?" No, we still have all your evidence. The recordings, the documents, everything. But if I look like a drug addict, who's going to believe my testimony? Agent Martinez sat on the other side of Jessica's bed. The evidence speaks for itself. Bank records, insurance fraud documentation, recorded conversations. A jury will believe the facts. What about Robert? Where is he now? We have him under surveillance. He doesn't know we're investigating him yet. Jessica gripped Sarah's hand tighter. You have to be careful. If he can't get to me, he might target you. I'll be fine. No, you don't understand. Robert doesn't just steal money. He eliminates problems. Before Jessica could explain further, Detective Beck returned with news. We just got a call from Robert Thompson. He's reporting Jessica missing. Says she never came home last night and he's worried about her drug problem. Drug problem? Sarah asked. He claims she's been addicted to prescription painkillers for months. Says he's been trying to get her into treatment, but she keeps relapsing. Agent Martinez shook her head. He's building a narrative, establishing Jessica as an unreliable witness before we even arrest him. When will you arrest him? Soon, but we want to gather more evidence first. Make sure the case is airtight. 2 hours later, Robert appeared at the hospital. Sarah watched through the ICU window as he approached the nurse's station, playing the role of the concerned boyfriend perfectly. I'm here about Jessica Martinez. I'm her partner, Robert Thompson. The nurse checked her computer. She's stable, but only family members are allowed to visit ICU patients. I understand. Could you at least tell her I'm here? And that I'm not angry about the drugs. I just want to help her get treatment. Sarah wanted to scream. Robert was continuing his performance even at the hospital, establishing his narrative of Jessica as a drug addict in need of his help. Agent Martinez appeared at Sarah's side. We're going to arrest him. Now. Here? We can't wait any longer. He's actively intimidating a federal witness. Sarah watched through the window as 2 FBI agents approached Robert at the nurse's station. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Robert's face change from concerned boyfriend to something much colder. The agents showed their credentials. Robert's expression became carefully neutral as he listened to whatever they were telling him. Then they placed handcuffs on his wrists. The arrest was handled quietly, professionally. Robert didn't resist or make a scene. He simply walked out of the hospital between the 2 agents, his silver hair still perfectly styled, his expression revealing nothing. But as they passed the ICU window, Robert looked directly at Sarah. Their eyes met for just a moment. His look wasn't angry or defeated. It was calculating, like he was already planning his next move. Is it over? Sarah asked Agent Martinez. The arrest is just the beginning. Now we have to build a federal case that will put him away permanently. How long will that take? Months. Maybe longer. RICO prosecutions are complex. Sarah looked back at Jessica, who was sleeping again. The young woman had risked everything to expose Robert's crimes. Now they all had to hope that the justice system would protect her from his revenge. But Sarah had seen the look in her father's eyes as they led him away. Robert Thompson wasn't finished fighting. The real battle was just beginning. And Sarah wasn't sure any of them were prepared for what Robert might do when he realized his carefully planned criminal enterprise was falling apart. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital windows as Sarah sat beside Jessica's bed, watching. The monitors track her vital signs and wondering how many other families had suffered because of Robert's systematic predation. Soon, they would all find out. Because Agent Martinez was right about one thing. This case was going to expose a criminal network that had been operating in plain sight for years. Destroying families and stealing legacies from people who could least afford to lose them. Robert Thompson had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated the women he tried to destroy. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same cemetery where she had buried her mother, but this time she wasn't alone. Jessica Martinez walked beside her, carrying a small bouquet of Helen's favorite flowers, yellow roses and baby's breath. The criminal trial had ended 3 weeks ago with Robert Thompson receiving a 25-year federal sentence for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. At 69 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. How do you feel? Jessica asked as they approached Helen's grave. Relieved, exhausted, but mostly grateful. Grateful? That mom didn't live to see what he really was. She always wanted to believe people could change. They stood quietly beside the headstone. Helen Thompson, beloved mother and friend. 1952 to 2024. The inscription didn't mention Robert at all. I brought something, Jessica said, pulling a letter from her purse. It's from my grandmother Isabella's family. They wanted to thank you. Sarah read the letter from the Martinez family in Phoenix. Isabella's children had finally learned the truth about their mother's death. Robert's conviction had given them answers they had been seeking for 3 years. 13 families, Sarah said. 13 families got justice because you were brave enough to speak up. We both were. I couldn't have done it alone. The investigation had eventually uncovered evidence linking Robert to 13 elderly women across 5 states. Each case followed the same pattern: careful research, gradual infiltration, financial manipulation, and in some cases, suspicious deaths that were originally ruled natural. Isabella Martinez was being exhumed for additional forensic testing. What will you do now? Sarah asked. I'm starting law school in the fall. Villanova. I want to specialize in elder abuse cases. That's wonderful. What about you? Are you staying in the house? Sarah looked out across the Pennsylvania hills that had been home for her entire life. The insurance money had been returned to her after Robert's conviction. The house was paid off. Helen's legacy was secure. For now, David and I are turning Mom's room into a home office. I'm going to work part-time and volunteer with the county's elder abuse prevention program. Teaching people to recognize the warning signs? Right. And helping families navigate the legal system when fraud happens. They walked back toward the parking lot, where David waited in their car. He had been Sarah's anchor through the trial, the media attention, and the slow process of rebuilding their sense of security. Jessica, Sarah said as they reached the cars, I need to ask you something. That night in the hospital, when you were drugged, you said Robert eliminates problems. What did you mean? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. During the trial, the prosecutor decided not to pursue some of the evidence I gave them. What evidence? Life insurance policies on 3 women who died in what Robert called accidents. Falls downstairs, medication mix-ups, complications during routine surgeries. Sarah felt a chill. You think he murdered them? I think he's capable of it. The prosecutor said the evidence was circumstantial, but you lived with him. You know what he's really like. He's patient, methodical, and he doesn't leave loose ends. Sarah thought about the look Robert had given her during his arrest. Cold, calculating, like he was already planning something. Do you think we're safe? Now that he's in prison? Robert has connections, other people in his network who are still operating. The FBI shut down his specific operation, but they didn't catch everyone. Should I be worried? You should be careful. Both of us should. They said goodbye in the parking lot. Jessica drove north toward Philadelphia and her new life in law school. Sarah drove south toward Lancaster and the home she was learning to inhabit without her mother's presence. That evening, Sarah sat in Helen's former bedroom, now converted to a home office, reviewing applications for the Elder Abuse Prevention Program. 10 families had already requested help navigating fraud cases that bore striking similarities to Robert's methods. The problem was bigger than anyone had realized. Elderly Americans were being targeted by organized criminals who understood exactly how to exploit the vulnerabilities of aging and isolation. But Sarah had also learned something else during the investigation. Communities could fight back when they understood the threat and worked together to protect their most vulnerable members. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Mrs. Thompson, this is Prosecutor Janet Wells. I have some news about your father's case. What kind of news? Robert Thompson was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent heart attack. Sarah sat down heavily in her desk chair. Are you sure? The medical examiner is conducting an autopsy, but initial indications suggest natural causes. He was 69 and under significant stress. Natural causes. Or perhaps someone in Robert's criminal network had decided he posed too much of a risk to their ongoing operations. Mrs. Thompson, are you there? Yes, I'm just processing. I wanted you to hear it from us before it hits the news. And I wanted you to know that his death doesn't affect the restitution payments to his victims. Thank you for calling. After hanging up, Sarah walked to her living room window and looked out at the quiet street where she had grown up. The evening was peaceful, with neighbors walking their dogs and children playing in their yards. Normal life. The kind of life Helen had wanted for her daughter. Sarah picked up her phone and called Jessica. "I just heard," Jessica said immediately. "Are you okay?" "I think so. Are you?" "Relieved, honestly. Now I don't have to spend the next 25 years wondering when he might get out." "Do you think it was really a heart attack?" "Does it matter? He's gone. His victims can finally have peace." Sarah thought about her promise to Helen. To forgive Robert for abandoning their family. But forgiveness, she had learned, didn't require forgetting. And it didn't require allowing someone to continue causing harm. "Jessica? Yes? Thank you. For everything. For saving my mother's legacy and probably saving my life. Thank you for helping me get justice for my grandmother." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness and thought about the past 6 months. The fear, the investigation, the trial. The discovery that her father was a predator who had systematically destroyed families for profit. But she also thought about the other discoveries. The strength she had found in herself. The community that had rallied to support her. The young woman who had become like a sister through their shared ordeal. And most importantly, the work that lay ahead. The families who still needed help. The elderly Americans who were still being targeted by criminals like Robert. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing an email to the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Elder Abuse. She had ideas for a statewide education program, resources for families dealing with inheritance fraud, support networks for people like Jessica who found the courage to expose predators. Her mother's death had been the target completion in Robert's criminal timeline. But it had also been the beginning of something else. A mission to protect other families from experiencing what Helen and Sarah had endured. Life doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything I went through means something today. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Thank you for spending this